I just wanted to tell you something that happened a few months ago. As you know, and as I wrote about it in Spiral, I was convicted of bank robbery in Mississippi in 1987. Sentenced to 15 years, I was sent to what is now a pretty infamous prison called Parchman Prison. Intent on escape, I often got up at 2 or 3 in the morning, while everybody was asleep, and looked out the window at the guard in the tower near the back gate. And I noticed that he usually went to sleep for an hour or two in the early mornings. And I used to get up and watch him, weighing my chances of climbing over the razor wire fence. Of course, I didn't want to do that, but I didn't know what else to do. One morning, as usual, I got up to look out the window, and I noticed there was another prisoner standing there, and he was apparently doing the same thing. So a couple of days later, we started talking. He and I eventually decided to come up with an escape plan. The man's name was Nevin Whetstone. He was in his late 30s, about 5'10", had dark hair, and he was a quiet, serious man, but a little socially awkward. And I found out that he was serving a life sentence for murder. And also I found out he had been in Parchman almost 10 years. A few months later, in April 1988, Nevin and I, dressed as guards, walked out the back gate of Parchman Prison. And we made it to the highway near the prison. And there, with the help of an accomplice, we made our way to the East Coast. Eventually, we separated, and I was caught a couple months later in Mobile, Alabama. And that's the last I ever heard of Nevin. I never heard from him again. And as you know, I've been in prison ever since. Well, when I got caught in Mobile a couple of days later, the detective came to my jail cell and he told me. He said, I talked to the warden at Parchman Prison, and he told me to tell you that when he got you back up to Parchman, he was going to beat your ass and put a logging chain on you and then put you somewhere where you'll never see daylight again. Now, do you want to sign these here extradition papers? Shoot, I looked at him and I said, hell no. Why would I sign them to go back up there and be treated like that? I'll tell you what, I'd be crazy to sign that. I'll just take my chances right here in Alabama. Well, eventually I went to trial, charged with a Mobile bank robbery that occurred a year before my incarceration in Parchman. And after 2 mistrials, I was convicted of bank robbery and sentenced to life without parole under the Habitual Offender Act. And I was sent to prison in Alabama. In 2014, after serving 26 years in an Alabama prison, my sentence was reduced to life, and that made me eligible for parole. In 2015, I was paroled and sent back to Mississippi to finish my original 15-year sentence. So now I've been in prison in South Mississippi for almost 10 years. During that time, I've worked hard to change the course of my life. Assigned as the institutional artist in teaching self-help classes, I'm now trusted in the prison's administration. And with less than 5 years to serve, I move about the prison freely. 3 months ago, I was summoned to the superintendent's office. And this wasn't unusual. I often go there to receive instructions regarding some kind of work that he wants me to do. Well, when I walked into his office, I was met by the superintendent, and along with the business manager, the head of the criminal investigation division, a member of the tactical unit, the deputy superintendent, and the warden. And they're all sitting there at a table. And of course, immediately I thought, well, this doesn't feel like an assignment. You know, this must be something serious. And I quickly searched my memory, you know, asking myself, have I done anything wrong? And my answer was no, not that I knew of. The superintendent said, shut the door. So I sat down facing the six officials, and the superintendent turned to the business manager and said, you ask him. And the business manager said, do you know a man named Nevin Whetstone? I was kind of shocked by that, the question, because I hadn't seen Nevin in 37 years, and of course, hadn't heard from him at all. And I said, yeah, he and I escaped from Parchman 37 years ago. The business manager held up a cell phone with Nevin's 1988 mugshot on the screen. He said, is this him? And I said, yeah, that's him. And then he flipped over to my 1988 mugshot and says, and is this you? And I said, yeah, that's me. Well, Nevin Whetstone has done it again, said the superintendent. I said, what? Done what? He said, escaped. He escaped from Parchman again yesterday. I couldn't believe it. I said, you got to be joking. Nevin and I, we're about the same age. He's got to be in his mid-70s. The head of CID said he's 75. And he escaped from a unit for the terminally ill prisoners. He said, Nevin's dying of cancer. I can't believe it, I said. And then I joked, well, I guess Nevin and I haven't been taking the same self-help courses all these years. But nobody laughed except me. I guess not, said the superintendent. Do you have any idea where he may have gone? No, I said, how could I? We've had no contact in the last 37 years. Certainly not since we escaped from Parchman. He said, well, how about friends? Do you know if he has any friends who may have helped him? Anybody that would, you know, help him on the outside? And I said, no. Like I said, it's been 37 years and we've had no contact. Of course, I've been in prison all that time. I guess Nevin has too. I said, obviously. I said, you know, Nevin was a loner. He didn't talk much and he didn't make a lot of friends. Well, somebody must have helped him, said the superintendent. I don't see how he could have gotten very far on his own. He was 75 and terminally ill, said the CID officer. Had to have some help. And I said, well, he's probably just didn't want to die in prison. And I'd certainly understand that, but I bet he didn't have any help. He's probably still wandering around out in the woods somewhere, or he just laid down to die. Well, okay, thanks for your help, said the superintendent. That's all, you can go. A few days later, Nevin was found still alive, only 7 miles from the prison. He was taken back to Parchman to die in the terminally ill unit. So, even though I talked about our escape from Parchman in Spiral, you can imagine how I felt. And this happened just a few months ago when they called me up there and showed me a picture of Nevin. I felt like we had gone full circle. and that's it. But you can imagine how shocked I was, and what a, it's like everything just comes back around if you. But of course, they never told me what, if he's still alive or not. It's only been a few months, but I think I told them that I looked at each of them and I said, you can't tell me that each of you, if you had life without parole and weren't going to ever get out of prison and you were still a young man, that you wouldn't try to escape. And most of them shook their head. Yeah, you're right. I said, yeah.